Right now, as you're settling in for this explainer, you're probably warm, right? And you probably didn't even have to try. The heat just kind of runs in your home. There's a winter coat hanging by your door that you absolutely didn't have to hunt down and make yourself. And there's food sitting right in your kitchen that'll still be perfectly good next week. But I want you to take a second and mentally strip all of that away. Picture just your bare skin facing a winter so incredibly brutal, so unforgiving, that it could literally kill you in your sleep before you even realize what was happening. For hundreds of thousands of years, during actual ice ages, that deadly environment wasn't a freak storm. It was normal life. Giant sheets of ice covering entire continents. And yet, our ancestors made it. I mean, you are the living proof of that. So today, we're going to look at the brilliant, the desperate, and honestly, the downright shocking ways they fought and won a war against winter that they absolutely could not afford to lose. To really wrap our heads around how incredible this survival story is, we have to look at the harsh biological reality. The last ice age peaked somewhere around 26,000 to 19,000 years ago. And let's be honest, humans are a soft, hairless species. We evolved in the heat of Africa. We are completely, entirely unbuilt for a frozen wasteland. We don't have thick fur like a mammoth, we don't have a dense layer of blubber like a seal, and we definitely can't naturally slow our heartbeats down to just sleep through the cold like a cave bear. If you take our clothes off in severe cold, the human body shuts down in a matter of hours. On paper, we should have been the very first things to die out. Wrong body, wrong place, worst possible time. But we had something those other animals didn't. A brain that could plan ahead, and hands that could engineer the exact things our bodies lacked. Okay, let's dive into this timeline to see exactly how our survival escalated. It wasn't just, one magic trick that saved us. It was a compounding series of really brilliant innovations. It obviously all started with mastering fire, which was absolutely crucial. By 400,000 years ago, fire was quite literally everything. But here's the catch. You can't carry a campfire with you when you're hunting. So, about 300,000 years ago up in northern Europe, humans started skinning bears to use their super thick waterproof hides as cloaks. But loose cloaks still leak a ton of body heat. It actually took hundreds of thousands of years to make the next massive leap, which finally led to complex architecture and tailored clothing. And what's really, truly wild here is how something so incredibly small changed the entire course of human history. Around 30,000 years ago, the sewing needle drops onto the scene. Now, it was just a thin little piece of bone or ivory with a tiny hole drilled right through it. But one scientist called it perhaps the single most important invention in human history. And they kind of hit the nail on the head. Because a loose bear skin thrown over your shoulders, that lets the freezing wind slice right through every single gap. But a needle? A needle meant you could actually sew. It meant fitted clothes, sealed seams, layered garments, sleeves that closed tightly at your wrist. The needle essentially turned loose animal skins into a customized, windproof suit of armor. But fitted clothing was really just the beginning. Our ancestors developed this whole suite of clever and, sometimes pretty gross survival gear. Out on those bright, flat, frozen plains, the blinding glare from the snow could literally destroy a hunter's vision. So they carved these super thin slits into pieces of bone or wood and tied them over their eyes. Boom, the world's first sunglasses. And before stepping out into that biting wind, just visualize this. A shivering hunter scooping up massive handfuls of raw animal fat, called tallow, and just smearing it all over their face and neck. It sealed the skin, locked in their body heat, and physically stopped the wind from pulling that warmth away. They actually applied that exact same logic to their clothing in their homes, too, using mud, moss, and the sticky pine pitch, almost like an ancient caulking, to seal up every tiny little draft.
Shelters of bone and snow.
So you obviously can't just wander the ice fields forever. But out on the flat, frozen plains of places like modern-day Ukraine and Russia, there were no caves. There were barely even any trees. So what do? Well, they looked around and used the one building material that was everywhere. The bones of giants. At a famous site called Mezherej, archaeologists actually found these incredible, complex roundhouses built almost entirely out of mammoth bones and tusks. And to heat these giant bone mansions without any wood, they burned mammoth fat and mammoth bone in these meticulously built fireplaces. And those fires reached staggering temperatures of over 600 degrees Celsius. For context, that is more than 1,100 degrees Fahrenheit. And this brings us to some absolute prehistoric genius when it comes to maximizing that heat. Many of these winter homes featured something we now call a cold trap doorway. Basically, they deliberately dug the entrance trench significantly lower than the main sleeping and living area. Why? Well, because cold air is heavy and dense, it would naturally sink down into that lower entrance trench and just pool there, trapped. Meanwhile, all that precious, life-saving warm air from the fire naturally rose right up into the elevated living space where the family was actually huddled. I mean, they figured out the complex thermodynamics of airflow tens of thousands of years before the first physics textbook was ever even a thought. They also utilized a material that honestly sounds completely counterintuitive to us today: snow. Now, snow is actually a phenomenally good insulator. Long before anyone ever perfected the iconic dome of an igloo, Ice Age humans figured out that piling thick, heavy walls of snow all around the outside of their shelters would brilliantly trap the heat inside. Even if the deadly air outside plummeted to 30 degrees below zero, the insulated inside of that snowbank shelter would hover right around freezing. It's a pretty stark reminder that back in the Ice Age, 0 degrees Celsius wasn't freezing. It was actually considered warm, cozy, and completely safe.
Part 2. The Slow Killer. Beating Winter Hunger.
Okay, so staying warm only keeps you alive for the night. The real creeping killer was winter hunger. Because of this, our ancestors had to meticulously plan out their entire food strategy all year long. They were never, ever surprised by winter. Their whole existence revolved around anticipating it. Step 1 was mass hunting. In places like eastern France, hunters used fire and incredible group teamwork to drive whole herds of reindeer and wild horses into these natural, inescapable limestone traps. Step 2 was pure efficiency. They squeezed absolutely every single calorie out of those carcasses, eating the meat, burning the fat for heat, cracking bones for the marrow. Literally nothing was wasted. But step 3 is where they truly secured their survival: long-term food preservation. Because of those mass hunts, they were able to build an incredibly sophisticated system of zero-power refrigeration. When they made a huge kill, they didn't just sit around and feast. They immediately got to work preserving it for the dark months ahead. First, they let the brutal environment do half the work by simply freezing fresh meat right out in the open air. They completely mastered the chemistry of smoking and drying meat to turn it into long-lasting jerky. But it gets better. They engineered deep, cool, underground cellars, digging pits straight into the permafrost to keep their stored food safe and temperature-controlled all winter long. There is even hard evidence showing they weighed massive slabs of mammoth meat down and deliberately sank them into near-freezing ponds, essentially using the icy water as a massive natural refrigerator. This immense, relentless focus on food preservation, smoking, freezing, using cellars, is the primary reason our species didn't just starve to death when the snow fell.
Part 3. Extreme Body Adaptations.
But of course, sometimes the careful planning failed, and survival demanded some seriously drastic adaptations. First off, they had to completely abandon any modern concept of personal space. Having a room to yourself during an Ice Age winter wasn't a luxury, it was a literal death sentence. To survive the bitter extremes, way more people packed under one single roof than we would ever tolerate today, specifically so they could share body heat. And it wasn't just humans either. If you fast forward to the absolute worst winters of medieval Europe and Russia, peasants would literally bring their livestock, like full-size cows and sheep, right into the bottom floor of their homes. The animals acted like these massive biological radiators, giving off huge amounts of body heat that rose up through the floorboards to warm the family living directly above them. Sometimes the cold penetrated so deeply that human biology itself actually had to adapt. Take the Yagan people down at the southern tip of South America. They lived in freezing, sleet-covered conditions, wearing almost no clothes at all. Their biological adaptation? Their bodies simply ran hotter than ours, generating way more internal metabolic heat. They also rested in this deep, incredibly tight squatting position to tuck their limbs in and drastically cut down on heat loss. But we also have to impartially look at the darkest corners of human survival. When the food completely vanished and the situation became unbearably desperate, archaeological evidence proves that some ancient humans turned to cannibalism. It wasn't done out of malice. It was just the ultimate horrific measure required when the only other alternative was the complete end of their family lineage. And that brings us to one of the most provocative, highly debated theories in all of ancient history. We know bears do it. We know certain rodents do it. But did early humans actually survive the harshest winters by hibernating? Look at this fascinating data here from a site in Spain called the Pit of Bones. This dates back roughly 430,000 years. Scientists studying these early human ancestors found some really bizarre damage in their bones that appears almost like clockwork, these cyclic, seasonal marks and totally interrupted growth patterns in the teenagers. Notice how this data directly mirrors the exact kind of bone damage we find in animals that hibernate, where bodily functions slow way down and the body basically starts feeding on its own reserves. Some scientists suggest that without enough fatty food to survive the long freeze, these early humans retreated deep into caves and essentially slowed their metabolisms into a deep, sustained sleep to just wait out the winter. Now, to be clear, it is highly debated. Other experts argue there are totally different explanations for this bone damage. But the simple fact that serious scientists are still arguing over whether our ancestors basically slept through the winter like cave bears really shows you just how extreme the Ice Age actually was. Which brings us to where we are today. In the grand, sprawling timeline of human history, it was quite literally only a blink of an eye ago that we went from stacking mammoth skulls just to block the wind to simply tapping a digital thermostat on our walls for instant, perfect heat. The deadliest, most ruthless environment our ancestors ever faced, a war they fought tooth and nail with fire, bone needles, and underground cellars just to live to see the spring, is now an inconvenience we complain about on the quick dash to our heated cars. We beat winter so entirely, so completely, that we forgot it was ever a war we were on the verge of